Since Bible means book, so it's good to add holy in front of it, because it's not just any book, but it's a holy book. And one of the words for holy, one of the definitions or meanings for holy is set apart. So it's a book that is different than all other books. Other words for it is the good news, which actually gospel means good news. And a lot of times some Bibles will have written on it good news. And you know why it's called the good news? Any ideas? Because it is good news. From the start to the very end, it's just full of good news. Now that in itself is exceptional. Nowadays you pick up a newspaper, you pick up a book, it's very rare that it's good news, especially the newspaper. If you get one article that at the end of it is good news, you're like, wow, this was a good day. Sometimes you'll get Bibles that are written New Testament on it. Now what does that mean, New Testament? It's basically the second half of the Bible. Not exactly half. But there's the first portion that's known as the Old Testament or Old Covenant. That's just how people refer to it. And then there's the second section, which is called the New Covenant or the New Testament. The split is there's 39 books in the Old Testament or Old Covenant and 27 books in the New. Now, the Bible in itself is one. But the reason we separate it is because something happened right before when we start reading the New Testament, or right after we start reading the New Testament. And that is that Jesus came to earth. Right? And so that's where the separation is. But in reality, it's one book. Because it's about one God who is the author of this one book. We said there were 40 different men who wrote it. Moses, in the first part of the book, he wrote the first 5 books, so he took quite a big chunk. And then we have Paul, towards the end of the Bible, where he takes quite a big chunk as well, where he's writing all the different letters. And then we have the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Who do you think wrote Matthew, the book of Matthew? Matthew, that's right. And same with Mark, Luke, and John. They were the apostles. Not all of them, but they were, in the first century who wrote down their view and their understanding of the scriptures, of the life of Jesus. So if we look at a quick overview of this whole book called the Bible, we see that in the very beginning, in chapter 1 of the Bible, it talks about how God created the world. That is the foundation, that is the start of our understanding of this book, the Bible. And that is something that our world struggles with. Even in education systems, even children growing up, this has become an issue now of a debate. They say that, the Bible, it's just more hypothetical. Or it's just a good story. It's just for people to feel secure in themselves. But in reality, the world is billions of years old. Or the world just came to being because for them to agree with the first chapter of the Bible means they have to live by the whole book. And so humanity and our world system, in order to not receive the whole book, they start from chapter 1 and they say, you know what, we don't really believe in that anymore because we think that we came from monkeys or apes. Or there was once just a big bang and everything just started to exist. It is so stupid. Honestly, it's amazing that it's doctors and scientists who have come up with this. You would think it would be people who are not as educated. But it's the world system, and it's the enemy that is at the moment the prince of this earth is Satan, who is trying to come and bring a deception into the eyes of and the minds of people. It's easier for them to believe and to teach and to write about such a stupid theory, if I can use that word, in order for them not to be accountable to a God. You see, it's either you believe in something like evolution or a Big Bang, or you believe that there actually is a God who in a week, 7 days, created this whole thing. Because if God actually created the world, and God created human mankind, and God breathed into Adam, and then He created Eve, and His breath, and He made Adam and Eve in His image, then suddenly humanity will say, oh wow, there's actually something beyond ourselves that we need to be accountable to. We're not the end in itself, but there's actually a greater power, there's a greater deity. There's purpose, there's life. And because of human beings being selfish, and because of the fact that we are all born in sin, the fact that we cannot be in relationship to a holy God, and we are affected by the enemy and Satan and all the demonic realms, we want to avoid that topic altogether as mankind. But this book, in the very first chapter, says it is God who says, let us make man in our image. This is where we came from. We did not come from the monkeys. We came when God took dirt and formed Adam. And then God breathed into Adam, and life came. And God met Adam and then Eve, and they were living in the garden, which was perfect. They were in charge and had dominion over the animals, the creatures. They named every creature. There were all these trees, all this beautiful, paradise. And they would walk with God in the cool of the day. They were once, Adam and Eve were in relationship with God. But one day, they disobeyed what God had commanded them not to do. God had said, you can have any fruit tree, you can eat anything you want, except don't touch the tree of good, the knowledge of good and evil. And we know the story where Eve, because of the serpent, the snake that came, she got deceived and she disobeyed God. And that's when humankind was expelled from the garden. That's where their relationship with God was cut, and they were forced out of relationship with God. That's in Genesis chapter 3. The very beginning of the book. But even from the time that they were expelled from the garden, they were expelled from the presence of God, God said, I will have a solution. I have a solution. And one day we will be reunited. One day we will be one again. There is hope. Even though creation right now is subject to futility, even though human beings are going to go through pain and suffering, even though there's going to be death, I have a solution. And that solution came through Jesus, His Son. So, from chapter 3 onwards, the first part of the Bible, the first covenant, or the Old Covenant, we see God's interaction with man. We read about how the Noah and the flood, that's chapter 8. How God, because of all the sin, decided to wipe out the whole universe, but then He saw Noah, who was a righteous man, and He said, build an ark, and he built an ark of wood, and he was able to put all kinds of animals in the ark to be able to keep life going on. And then in chapter 12, we see that God looked down and saw Abraham, and He chose Abraham. He said, Abraham, all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed through you. Because He chose Abraham, and He knew that out of Abraham was going to come the seed, was going to come the Messiah, Christ. Jesus was going to come from Abraham. And from then on, from Abraham, we see how there was Isaac, and then Jacob, and then Joseph, and then how the children of Israel were in Egypt in slavery, and then Moses came and set them free, and they went out into the wilderness, and then they entered into the promised land through Joshua. And then Joshua, in the promised land, afterward, they started fighting and conquering more land. And then there were the judges. And then after the judges like Samson and Jephthah, and more judges, Deborah, there came a time when the children of Israel said, we want a king. And there was Samuel, and Samuel anointed Saul as the first king of Israel. And then Saul sinned, and then came David. And David was a man after God's heart, who was a shepherd, but he knew God, he worshipped God, and he was able to put down a lion and a bear, and eventually he put down Goliath. That amazing story, where a teenager was able to kill a giant with a sling and stone, and then cut his head. And then David, who wrote a lot of the Psalms, which are halfway through the Bible, he was a righteous king, and then came Solomon, and then after Solomon came a lot of kings. And then Israel sinned, and then they went into captivity. And then there were the prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, and then there were the minor prophets who all prophesied saying there's one day that the Messiah is going to come. And that one day came around the time of John the Baptist that we start reading in Matthew, Mark, and John, where John the Baptist